I use all of these to mix my snare drum.
Here's what they do. Silencer. This is a super impressive drum gate that gets rid of everything you don't want while keeping what you do want. I use this both on snare top and bottom with just slightly different settings. You can use the 3 knobs and the threshold to dial it in to the way you like. This is what it sounds like. So I had 2 snare drum microphones, which means I needed to check and see if they're in phase with each other. And if they're not, I need to flip the polarity switch. And that's exactly what I did on the snare bottom mic with Sentry Tube. This plugin is a lot of different things. I flipped the high pass filter on it as well as the polarity switch. Then I used it as an EQ. I boosted some top end and I got rid of a lot of mid-range at about 2.5K. Then I did a little cut in the low end. After that, I used it as a compressor and I compressed it about -7 dB of gain reduction at its very peaks and about -3 dB as its average. And this is what it sounds like. EQ. I started EQing on the bottom mic already, but now let's really start EQing this drum. I have 2 EQs in a row on snare top and 1 EQ on snare bottom. The first EQ has a high pass filter to about 100 Hz. Then it has a boost at 134 Hz, and followed by 3 different cuts in the mid-range. The first one is because of a really weird ring at 191 Hz. Then it's followed by 2 other cuts, one at 324 and one at 875. Those cuts just get rid of a lot of mud in the mid-range. And finally, I've got a boost at 41K for lots of top end. And then I use a filter at about 12K to get rid of some of that hiss. The next EQ is a boost of the snare at 304 and 2560. See, the snare bottom EQ is pretty aggressive, but it cuts out a lot of low end at about 530 Hz and 2640 Hz. Then I boost a shelf in the highs and put a filter at 16K. Then I use Sentry Tube to do some more EQing of the snare top, boosting some top end and cutting a lot of mid-range at 2.7K. Then I use it again to compress just like I did on the snare bottom. The top still needs some cuts at 246 and 580. Here's what the drum sounds like now. Saturation. Let's get some harmonic frequencies into this drum. Both the top and bottom are using high saturation. The top is 3 dB and the bottom is 5. Now it's time to compress. I use a pretty aggressive bus compressor to compress the snare. I put it on a fast attack and a medium release with a 4:1 ratio. And then I use the mix knob to beef up that snare drum. More EQ, I just needed to get that last little bit of body and attack. Then I chucked a clipper on there to get any peaks that might pop out. This also helps get the drum loud. Now the fun stuff, reverb. I put a short reverb on the snare bottom just to give it some room and space. Then I copied everything I did on the snare top track and put a really long plate reverb on it. I used this as a fully wet reverb to mix in with my snare. I then took away some top and bottom end in the snare drum and then compressed it with an LA2A compressor. Here's what the snare drum sounds like now. Though it sounds pretty good, there is something missing with this snare drum, and you know what it is? It's the fact that we're listening to it on its own. A lot of snare subtleties come from overhead mics, room mics, and other mics that just put it in a space. So I'm using 2 overhead microphones, 2 room microphones, and a center of the kit mic that really give it some space, room, and a destination in this mix. Let's take a listen. Now this is the way I tuned my snare drum in the last drum cover that I made. If you want to hear that, click right here. And for now guys, thanks for watching and keep dreaming big.